let's descend through fog and rain and see if we can find the sane way out of this small mess. It's not as if we'll lose our...
The next agenda item is the sign code. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McDonald and the city attorney to give a brief presentation, and then we're going to open it up for public comment.
Well, I guess occasionally I'll have to say that in our role as staff, we hand the council a hot potato, and this may be one of those occasions. We have had a request for enforcement of, and we've had more than one request for enforcement of the sign code, particularly as it relates to the sandwich board signs. And I think there are some other sign issues as well, banners. And when that occurred, we started reviewing the sign code in a little more detail to figure out how we would go about doing that, and frankly have some concerns about the language in the code and how we would enforce that fairly. And the city attorney will give you a little bit of background about the being content neutral and some concerns about the language in the code now and the provisions in the code probably not being content neutral. Personally, I think that the code is ripe for being rewritten by the city attorney and simplified. I think it's far too complex and subject to interpretation. We also have a concern about just the logistics of enforcing the sign code, and probably think that the thing that would work the best for the city is more of a public education and not necessarily honor system, but public education. A way of going about it. Typically, sandwich board signs are out on the weekend, and the two most predominant ones are real estate signs and the signs that advertise church services on Sunday. And largely, those signs will come up and go down on the same day, but there are some that will linger longer than that. During the week, we don't have a tremendous problem with the sandwich board signs, but we will admit that if you read the letter of the code and you try to kind of fathom what the intent is, probably people are not in compliance with the code, particularly if they've got sandwich board signs, some of the sandwich board signs in the right-of-way. The bottom line, I guess the ask is that we would like to have the city attorney take a stab at simplifying the code and making it clear and make something that would hold up if we start going to enforcement, more aggressive enforcement that would hold up and be fair across the board. With that, I'd like to let the city attorney kind of give you his take on our current code and some of the issues that we have discussed that are a concern.
Mayor, members of the council, as the city administrator has stated, we have in reviewing the enforcement issue seen that there are some ambiguities in the current code. I'll give you an example, and this is probably the most challenging of the provisions. The code completely exempts incidental signs. It's not defined what an incidental sign is, but incidental signs no larger than 4 feet square for residential uses, 6 square feet for commercial uses, and 8 square feet for industrial uses are completely exempt. There are other questions over definition, signs which are inherently temporary. We don't know what that is. That isn't defined. So while in terms of sheer enforcement, it's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. It's impossible really for every government to enforce every law. And governments have the right to make choices about where they allocate their enforcement resources. But in terms of a sign code that can be understood and enforced in a clearer, more even manner, there's potential to improve this significantly. As the city administrator referred in Washington, commercial speech and political speech are afforded almost the same level of protection. So content of speech, we have to be careful not to try and regulate particular types of speech more than other types of speech. And this code, of course, is attempting to regulate everything. It's the placement, it's the lighting, it's wayfinding signage, every other kind of signage. And so what we would propose to do is to maybe look at addressing, at least initially, right-of-way, signage in the right-of-way, which seems to be the major concern, and then proceed to other areas once we have that addressed. I've worked on a number of sign code updates. Signs have a large constituency. They are on every side of the issue, and so it's something that needs to be approached carefully, but I'm confident that we can make a significant improvement both in terms of understandability and enforceability.
Mr. Victor, can you share with us, what does that look like in terms of timing, as far as you drafting the legalese part of it and then bringing it back for action?
Really, whatever the council's pleasure is. Certainly, we can do that in, a couple months, I would think. And then the council could send it to the Planning Commission if you want to, but at least we could do a first review with the City Council and see where you think it's going, what kind of outreach there should be, if there should be outreach. But at least an initial suggestion, draft of what would be a simplified and more efficient right-of-way sign code could be produced, reasonably quickly.
The roof is on fire. The roof is on fire.